All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Kati Gostaspi, and welcome to the Kati G podcast series. The mission of my podcast is for us to realize that we're great. We can be even greater, and most importantly, how we can bring this greatness to the world through our brand. Why do I do this podcast? Two real reasons. I care about humanity deeply, and I want us all to really own how great we are and be happier in our lives. And secondly, I have the same feelings of being less than, just like everyone else. And some days are good, some days are bad. And so there's learning to be there, to be had there for all of us. So this specific series is the Women Lawyers Making a Difference podcast series. So we are so privileged and honored to be joined by Ashley Tabaddor. Judge Tabaddor is joining us in her capacity specifically as president of the National Association of Immigration Judges. I have known Judge Tabaddor for a very long time, back in the days when we were both practicing lawyers in Washington, D.C. So she has been kind enough to allow me to call her what I usually call her, which is Ashley. However, in respect of the bench, she is Judge Ashley Tabaddor. So welcome, Ashley. Thank you so much for giving us your time today.
Thank you, Kathy, for having me with you today.
My pleasure. We're so excited to have you. So, how about we just start? I know the audience probably wants to learn all about how you got onto the bench, and we'd love to have you share that part of your life. But share a little bit about your background and maybe why you went to law school, period, because that's a question I always have for my audience and for every lawyer I meet, because I think it's an important part of why we do what we do.
Sure, I'll be glad to do so. So I'm an Iranian American, which means that I was born in Iran. I was about maybe 10 or 11 when we left Iran after the revolution, because of the revolution. So I'm a refugee from Iran in the United States, and I think that has shaped greatly my experiences, my worldview, and my dedication to public service and interest in following law. When I came to the United States, I didn't speak any English, so I had to learn the language. I knew a lot about America because in Iran, there was always conversations about America, people wanting to go to America. So it was often a part of the dialogue, but I didn't know the language. I didn't know much else. I had to sort of immediately learn to steep myself in the culture, to learn the language, to just sort of adapt. But within a few years, as I found myself in high school and learning about the American political system, about the American governance, I was absolutely awed and fascinated by basically the founding principles, these ideas of separation of powers, this concept of recognizing that humans need this checks and balances, that if there is power, you need to have a check on power. And because of my background from Iran and knowing, at least as a child even, what happens when you have dictatorial regimes or what happens when you have people in places of authority without adequate checks, I was very much interested in learning more about the American political system and the American government. So I continued that study in college. And my major was poli-sci, political science, with an emphasis on the American political system. And I knew pretty early on, I think it was in high school, that I really wanted to see myself in public service, and I wanted to see myself in some form of law, particularly in litigation. I was deeply influenced by the civil rights movement and the role of federal government and the role of the judiciary branch in ensuring that checks and balances. So I felt that as someone who has so much there's so much that I owe to my new homeland, that there's this sense of responsibility, that this would be a way for me to give back in a way that I can use some of my strengths.
Wow, that's a fantastic story. I really love how you are so self aware at such a young age, right? To know all that and to have such a fascination with what you were fascinated by and pursue it. It's something that you talk about so naturally, but for our audience, I think a lot of people know this, and I know this for a fact. It's not always so easy to just trust our instincts and our gut and listen to our own voice rather than what other people say we should be doing. And I share a lot of your story, obviously, as an immigrant. I think there's a drive as an immigrant, and there's a if for good immigrants, let's call it that, whatever that means. But it's just a sense of appreciation for where you land and giving back to that culture and that community. So I really appreciate that, and I share that with you. And I think that's fantastic. So let's fast forward. Why immigration in particular, or whatever you want to say about that topic?
Sure. So I ended up at UC Hastings, which is a state university, a law school. At the time I went into the law school, it was very well known for having the largest number of individuals in public service, as well as the largest number of people on the bench as judges. So that was a very attractive selling point for me to go to UC Hastings. And then while I was there, I was trying to find my way in terms of, okay, wait, how can I land? How, which way can I find my way into public service, into federal sort of rather than state government service? And I had a mentor, a good friend who was a couple of years ahead of me, who had completed a summer law intern program with the Department of Justice. And he's the one who introduced me to the summer law internship program with the Department of Justice, which is essentially within the department, there are all these different components. It could be the FBI, it could be, like I said, immigration court, antitrust division. There's a whole bunch of different components. And every year, the components that are looking for summer interns advertise through this program. When I was looking at the available components for that particular summer, the immigration court jumped out at me. And with my background as a refugee and sensitivity to immigration, it just seemed like a natural connection. I would also say that one other selling point was that the immigration court had the largest number of applicant pool that they were seeking. So I thought, if I go with that, I have a better chance of actually landing it.
Hey, that's smart. The numbers don't lie, right?
Oh, yeah, they had 15 openings versus one or two. So I said, hey, let's
I
work
love
the
your
numbers in my favor.
authenticity, right? I love that. It's honest. It's true. Sometimes, our stories and why we did certain things don't have to be so glamorous. It's just, left brain linear analytical thinking that guides us as well, right?
Quite practical. And also it was one of the, most of the opportunities at the time were in Washington, D.C. I was obviously on the West Coast at the time in San Francisco, and my family are in Los Angeles. They also happen to have summer externship programs in Los Angeles. So it was a win-win situation. I looked at it and said, oh, they have openings in Los Angeles. They have the highest number of people that they're looking for. Immigration sounds interesting. I'm an immigrant. I've done a little bit of sort of volunteer work in that area. Let's go for it.
And so what has been, and so and then you actually did that, and then that's where you ended up. Is that a correct assessment?
Yes. I mean, I was sort of dipping my toes in the water to see if this is something I like. At the time, I have to say, immigration law was not necessarily considered the sexiest area of the law. It was the stepchild of the Department of Justice. It was much sexier to be, let's say, at the antitrust division or the civil rights division or at the U.S. Attorney's office. The immigration court wasn't necessarily something that people were flocking to. But when I went there and I spent my summer there, I was absolutely blown away by the experience. It was everything I was looking for. Immigration law is one of the most complicated areas of the law, so it is exceptionally intellectually stimulating. I felt that every day I was trying to put together a puzzle and try to navigate a puzzle, so that was really interesting to me. I really enjoyed the camaraderie that I saw. The judges were so friendly. I had an opportunity to work with a lot of judges in a short period of time, and a number of them took me under their wing and really helped me work my way through the system and understand the system. And so, and then finally, I was doing work while I'm in law school that directly impacted people's lives in such a fundamental way. I was helping the judges draft decisions that could forever change the trajectory of someone's life. Knowing where we came from, I just knew that that was something that was a good fit for me.
Oh, that's so inspiring. I think for all the women lawyers listening to this podcast, it's really a question of where can we be of highest service and follow our passion and our purpose and be able to be a direct have direct consequences based on our action. And so immigration law, I never stopped to think about that, Ashley, that it's very complex, I think is the word you used, and yet it's got such a human component to it, correct?
That's
That
right.
there's heart and head, and I don't know what the complexities. I'm a securities lawyer. I guess you can ask. It depends on people's practice area. When I stopped practicing, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do next, and I started interviewing other lawyers just because I'm like, securities law is awfully complex. Let's see what other lawyers do. And I would be like, what do you do all day? Because I never had that opportunity to do that. And so I trust you when you say immigration law is complex. I never did interview an immigration lawyer. So there you go.
You don't have to trust me. This is actually, I believe it's a Supreme Court decision that compares the Immigration and Nationality Act to the Internal Revenue Code and saying that
Ah.
they are toe to toe. And then, of course, there's a debate between which one is more complicated. And I think people generally consider the tax code to be one of the more complicated areas of the law. But I hear you. I mean, SEC filings and sort of regulations are on par.
Well, yes, but you know what? I think what you're saying, and I want everyone listening to this to consider this for your own practice. And look, it's very personal, so you get to decide. It has nothing to do with what I say or what Ashley says necessarily. But there was no heart in my securities law practice. It was exactly what you said: regulatory filings and compliance, and it was great. It was very analytical. I just wasn't really exercising the other half of my brain, the creative part, where there's just a feel good moment. There's lots of feel good moments, but it was mostly from the substantive perspective. And I think that's something that lends purpose to our legal careers, especially, and I'm not dismissing men, but especially as women. We're always trying to have gender neutral conversations, but you can't deny that for a lot of women, the emotional side of things is important. And so you want to feel good about what you do, but that's a human element as well. Men want to feel good about what they do too, in order to want to get up and go to work every day. So,
Absolutely.
so let me ask you, what would you like to share with us as we're learning about what it's like to be an immigration law judge? And that's the first part. And then what should we know about the National Association of Immigration Judges? It's a particularly interesting time in life, of course, to be involved in immigration in any capacity, but much less as a judge, and then being also president of the National Association of Immigration Judges.
Sure, fantastic, fantastic question. So as I said, I was very much inspired by the founding principles of our country, with this separation of powers, checks and balances, this idea that we really need to have, a judiciary that checks on the legislative and the executive, and vice versa with all the three. And and unfortunately, with the immigration court, while I was very lucky to have stumbled into it and then found the reasons that I explained, inspired to get involved and continue with it, because I've been with the Department of Justice in various capacities connected to immigration for past 20, 25 years now. I've been on the bench for about 15 years. And prior to that, a good amount of it, I was dealing in some way or another with immigration world. What has happened is that I've really come to realize that we have a fundamental structural flaw with the way that we have set up our immigration court system.
Hmm.
Most people don't realize that when we say the word immigration court and immigration judges, that the court system and the judges don't have the fundamental characteristics that we as Americans reasonably should expect it to have. What I mean is that our immigration court system is not part of the judiciary. So it's not part of a separate branch of the government that would serve as a check on the legislative and the executive branch. Rather, we are part of a law enforcement agency. We are part of the Department of Justice, which is the executive branch. And the judges are hired and fired by the US Attorney General. And in spite of all that I have learned, it really has taken me a long time to fully appreciate the significance of what it means when you structurally handicap something like a court and the judicial, sort of the adjudicatory elements of the court. So we are now in a situation where the immigration court and the judges have been utilized and expressly pretty much used as an extension of the law enforcement policies of
Mm.
each administration. And I say this not just with specific to this administration, although we've seen the greatest amount of intrusion into the independent administration of the court and the independent
Mm.
decision making authority of the judges. But it's something that has plagued us from the inception in various capacities. I know when I first started as a law clerk, it was during the Clinton administration with Attorney General Janet Reno, and she recognized that the adjudicatory component really needs to be separated from the law enforcement component. So she recognized that in large part and sort of separated out the lines of communication, did not intrude upon the decision making. But even she had some examples in terms of some cases that she took as a mechanism to rewrite the law. But it was really an exception rather than the rule. And throughout the years, we've seen other ways that each administration and each attorney general has sort of reconfigured the court to be aligned with the law enforcement policies of the executive branch. And we are now at a situation where the judges are now subject to quotas and deadlines. They are subject to micromanagement. The appellate judges are all politicized hirings. The chief appellate judge is the director that is directly responsible to the executive branch law enforcement priorities. And the cases are being utilized as a way to pick and choose to rewrite the law. So it has become quite obvious that we can no longer really continue to function as a quote unquote a court unless we remove the immigration court from the Department of Justice and give it that independence and give the judges the protection they need to make decisions without any fear of sort of losing their job or sort of adverse action.
Wow. Thank you for that concise explanation. I got it. Fear never drives sound judgment, right? I mean, that's just a given. And it's amazing how structure and lack of structure plays out so many places in our world, and especially at the highest levels where you think everyone has got everything figured out, right? And and that makes me sleep well at night. This is still a great country, but those are all things that could use revamping and tweaking. So you said it so brilliantly, and I really appreciate your clarity around it. So, what is the National Association of Immigration Judges, I guess, doing about this, or what do you see, perhaps, is a better word? What do you see as the future that we can look forward to? Because I have lots of immigration lawyers as clients, and they're not just busy these days. They're facing what you're talking about in their own capacity as the lawyers that come up against the bench. I think, and all the we're not even talking about COVID-19 right now and the wrench that's thrown into the process and being able to make sure due justice is served. Correct. So.
Right. I think, again, going back to the brilliance of our founding fathers and founding sort of principles, it's amazing to have that kind of insight into the sort of human psyche. But by the same token, it's not worth the paper it's written on unless there are people who are willing to stand up and protect it. And so
Absolutely.
in terms of what is NAIJ doing and what can people do is one, NAIJ is actively educating everyone because what has happened is the department has continued to use the words immigration court, immigration judges. So a lot of times when people hear that, They just feel like, okay, it's fine. It's a court, they're judges, things are going to be fine. But we've really had to actively go out there and educate everyone so that they recognize that those words are really misnomers at this point. And with that, once people recognize, once that light bulb goes on that says, uh-oh, this is not right, then there's an inspiration to act, which means that there is this coalition, there's this grassroots movement that has been created. And we have never seen this much support as we have seen it now with American Bar Association, the Federal Bar Association, the ALA, which is the largest bar association of practitioners in immigration law. And every one of them has now come out in support of what we've been saying, which is to push Congress, push members on the Hill to create legislation that would remove the immigration court from the Department of Justice and make it an independent immigration court. And that's what we are doing, is advocating for that so that we can fix that fundamental flaw, get rid of that design defect. After that, we can now look at how do you build upon that foundation. But
Yeah.
until you fix the foundation, everything else is going to be symptomatic of that.
Absolutely. And that's what I always say when people come to me and go, my world is branding, but really it's about who are you as an authentic person? And then how do we bring that legal substance to the world? And I always say, your business brand, your legal brand is like a house. It can't really rest unless there's a stable foundation under it. And that is your own brand and who you are. And it's harkens the same thing when foundation isn't stable or things haven't been thought out, or really it's about change, right, Ashley? That
Yeah.
we all have to look at things, and as time goes by, what works and what doesn't, and we have to be willing to adapt. And I think what you guys are doing at NAIJ is really important. It's education. People don't understand what needs to change unless they're educated and then given tools to grassroots or not, but be able to be part of the solution if you don't like what you see, because we all want to make this country greater and we all want to go back to the founding principles, which are not basic, they're foundational, right? And that's really what's important to keep in mind, I think.
Absolutely. I think I've been very fortunate that from very early on, I had a sense of sort of a purpose to me. What I need to do was always clear. The details may not have been clear, but the sort of broad brushstrokes was always clear. But I've also found that you have to constantly fine tune it, that you have to constantly be pausing and reflecting on who are you and what do you stand for, what is your driving force, where do you see yourself, how do you maintain that sort of purposeful existence so that you can feed your soul. Otherwise
Absolutely.
you're just sort of lost, going from one thing to another based on the winds, so to speak.
Yeah, and the practice of law in general is not easy. It takes a lot of effort. I think it's a very noble profession, which is why I'm so proud to be a lawyer. However, it's taxing, it's long hours, and we all know what we signed up for. And to your very eloquent point, if when we lose our sense of purpose, we falter. And then so it's very important to always go back to, why am I doing this and what's my mission? And then when we have lovely, brilliant women like you who step up and say, okay, well, then, serving on the bench is a very big deal. It's a huge honor, but, it's something I don't think anyone takes lightly when they put in their application. And then, serving in the capacity of president of a national organization is another one that's time consuming. So when you know what you're going after and what your passion and your purpose is, it makes professional life that much more enriching and graceful and has ease. And also it allows us to live a much more fulfilled personal life, which, you can't not take your human to work. I mean, as a judge, for sure, you can't not take your human to work, but as in any capacity, in any profession, especially as lawyers, we can't leave our human at home. So I agree
Absolutely.
wholeheartedly. So if you have for all the immigration lawyers that might be listening, and because I know a lot of them it's a struggle right now to make sure they're doing their job correctly and representing their clients well, given, the virtual nature of everything. But in general, what words of wisdom do you have for immigration judges in general? And what words of wisdom do you have for women lawyers who are really looking to make a difference with their careers right now, given the pandemic and any crisis that might come up? It doesn't always have to be a pandemic, and hopefully it never will be.
Sure. I mean, this has been a personal struggle for a long time, and more acute more recently because of this extreme need or pressure where you just feel that the world is somehow amiss, and I feel this responsibility to try to do everything I can within my power to correct it. And yet you find yourself extremely exhausted, sometimes spent, burnt out, which has really made me stop and think about balancing and the importance of recognizing where you're most impactful and where you're just spinning your wheel. And I think that's where it keeps coming back to reflecting on, okay, who am I? What do I stand for? What can I actually do with what I see to be in need of fixing? There's just so much happening around the world. You open the papers, you look at globally, you look at locally, you look at nationally. There's no shortage of adversities and challenges, and now, of course, with the pandemic. And I think what I have found that has worked for me in terms of striking a balance is, first, just recognize that you can't fix everything. So this is not your responsibility. You didn't cause it, and you're not responsible for fixing everything. So just kind of relieve yourself of that guilt. Second is to recognize that you deserve to be happy as well, which means that, and this is it's a win-win situation, because the studies have shown that happiness brings success. Success doesn't bring happiness.
Absolutely.
So you need to focus on what makes you happy so that you would have the reserve and the energy to put into where you can succeed. And this means take care of yourself, your mental health, take care of your physical health, have your social time, make sure you're doing your exercises, you're connecting with friends and family and loved ones. But then in terms of where you want to be impactful, just remember where you can be most impactful. I was interviewed a while ago for a book that someone was doing, and I was featured in it. And she asked me about sort of my background about being an Iranian American woman. And she said, well, what are you doing for the women in Iran? And I said, nothing. I feel powerless. There's nothing that I'm doing. I'm not there. I'm not fighting it. And I don't have the capability to do it. But I'm doing what I think I can be impactful on, which is my role at the immigration court, which is my role in trying to make sure that checks and balances are observed as much as possible. And I've struggled with it a lot. I feel guilty that I'm not helping, but I just had to come to realization that I can't fix that. This is not within my power, even though I'm an Iranian American, and of course, as a woman and Iranian background, I have a lot of sympathy. But I had to recognize that I have very little ability to make a change there. I have a lot more ability to make a change here.
And that's just so beautifully said. I think we often feel we should be everywhere doing everything. And like you said, you called it balance, I call it harmony. Because for me, I find when I say balance, I find myself picturing myself on a tightrope walking and then falling off. So harmony is an ebb and a flow. Call it whatever you want, though. The
Sure.
point is, where can we be of contribution and impact? And we'd like to be everywhere doing everything, but as women, I think in particular, in this career, we juggle so many things. So really, I have found for myself, when I just show up and do my best and be my contribution wherever that is, then I just role model the behavior that I hope I can see in the world. And then people get to choose, because I can't force anything on anyone anyway. So like you said, the women in Iran and the regime and politics and all that, When others see me doing my thing and doing it with pride and doing it for the betterment of truly of other people and processes, just like you're doing, it becomes motivational and inspirational. And then others can just pick up and bring their best selves in their own version. So that's how I interpret what you just said, because that's what I see works. And I hope everybody who's listening just takes that to heart. We can't fix everything by ourselves. What we can stay in control of is ourselves, and fundamentally bringing our best selves to every situation, including our personal lives and our business lives. So this now, I just want to switch gears to part two, Ashley, and just because I think people learn best when we teach through learning. And so tell me, it's my gift to thank you for joining me. What's one thing that's been on your mind that we can work through with you for the benefit of the women lawyers listening to this?
Well, I think when you send me the email about it, he says, what is one of your dreams, professional dreams?" And that, of course, gave me pause to think about it. I've always had the dreams. I remember I started in high school wanting to be the president, and then realizing, well, I can't be the president because I wasn't born here. For a while, I was thinking of getting together some sort of, change in the Constitution, the
I
exception.
love it.
But that had a very short-lived life. Then I really wanted to be a senator. And these are sort of early dreams, and because of sort of, again, this desire to want to have an impact that is broad in scope. But as I learned more about sort of individual ways through the litigation, through case law, through federal government, I became more and more involved in that. And so my dreams have often focused on now sort of being on the bench in some capacity. The immigration court has been an amazing opportunity, but I think aspirationally, I've always sort of thought of it would be great to be what's called an Article 3 judge. So a district court judge, or of course, the Supreme Court would be sort of an unbelievable dream, but that seems even more, that seems truly out of reach. Whereas perhaps, an Article 3 judge. But even that also, to be honest with you, has always felt out of reach because it has
Well,
required
why?
so much more.
Yeah, why? Tell me why it feels out of reach. Because this is actually a really good point you raised. I kind of cut you off. I'm not sure whether there was a question at the end of that, but I cut you off because I get so many lawyers, women lawyers in particular, saying, "Oh, well, yeah, I want to do that." Because I'm always asking people it's an intentional brand that gets results. If we don't have intentionality in a dream that then we can put in writing and actually ascribe mile markers to measure our success, then we can't really get anywhere. But I don't know, because I think it's a lofty dream, always gets in our way. So why does it seem lofty to serve on the Supreme Court? Yesterday, Justice Breyer spoke at the American Bar Association annual conference virtually. And I liked what he had to say, but I love what you have to say. So why?
I guess when I look at it, I think that in a lot of ways, it requires things that are outside of my control. So the perception is that those types of appointments, those types of opportunities, just require a lot of maybe politicking, a lot of political connections, a lot of sort of things that to me just don't resonate. I've always felt one of the reasons, to be honest with you, I went into government is because I never wanted my life to be about, let's say, money. I didn't want to be working, for the bottom line for some firm in 6-minute increments. I wanted to be driven by that sense of purpose. And this idea that somehow in order to be appointed, you need to make this networking, this contacting for that self-serving purpose has always felt very, it just doesn't feel right. And so I've thought that this is not something, it doesn't come natural. It's not something that makes me happy. It's very hard. It's not something that I do. So that's one perception that has just made me think that, well, it's not only is it outside my control, but the stuff that I could control, I don't like doing it. And so every time it comes down to maybe thinking of it in those contexts, I just shy away and I say, well, I'm just going to do I'm going to continue doing the things that give me purpose, that make me happy. So,
Fair enough. Go ahead. There was a second part to what you were going to say, and then I'll give you my thoughts on it.
and I think so. So that's certainly one part. The what I think requires this out of things outside my control. But then I guess the other part is, do you really? Is this something that I believe is truly, I guess, available? Like, is this something that's truly an option for an Iranian American? With my background, right? With the level of sort of with the professional life that I've had, with the public life that I've had in this context, in this day and age, is that really something that's going to be a real dream that can be accomplished?
Yeah, fair enough. So if you are a client of mine, I would tell you, one, I agree with you. If something does not feel like, if a goal does not, the steps to get to the goal do not feel like things that you'd want to pursue because it doesn't feel like who you are. And we use the F word, folks, feel, because it really is. You have to reach down into your gut, into your higher self, and really think, to get to that point, to get to that result, would I want to go through these steps? Would it seem authentic? Because if your answer is no, like Ashley said, you really will not get to that result because you cannot do something inauthentic and expect the right results. It just won't work. I happen to believe in the, universal laws of truth, and the universe doesn't work that way. It doesn't grant you what you don't authentically put out there. So to that, I agree with you. However, the other side of that is what you said second about, would someone with my background and experience in an Iranian American woman fit? So that is all, I think, a construct of our mindset. And you have a fantastic mindset. I would say to you, if you're a client, work on really sitting in that vision, if that's the vision that you want to hold for yourself. And don't worry about the hows, those wicked, wicked hows. I have this third manuscript that I want to put out. And I'm like, now, how am I going to get this in the right publisher's hand? Blah, blah. I'm like, Ketty, don't worry about the hows. Just sit down and write the best manuscript you can, and then hold the vision that it will end up in the right publisher's hands. And you've seen the world. Look, Ashley, you and I are both refugees from another country, doing our best to make this country and humanity better. Who would have ever thought we would have gotten this far, right? And this is for all the listeners, right? That if you and I and all the listeners that sat down and thought about the hows, we couldn't have ever written a work of fiction this interesting, right? I mean, it doesn't work that way. So just focus on the vision, hold the vision. Don't worry about the hows. But if it's really something that you think you would be a contribution to, then let the universe decide if that's the right place for you, as long as you believe it is. But if we start doubting ourselves, and as women, we're really good at that, then it's never going to happen. And then we're going to say, see, it's because I was so and so, or Iranian American, or, had purple hair, or was born, whatever, like we have all sorts of good reasons. But it all comes down to fundamentally our mindset. So if that works for you, it works for me. I love to see people that have passion and purpose and have a greater desire for humanity to be better in positions of decision making and authority, because they do it with grace and it comes with ease, and we can all tell it's for the right reason. So I'm all for it. I hope that makes sense and that was valuable.
It was. As you were talking, it reminded me of an experience I had. So, I mean, this because of your background. Sort of being at the U.S. Attorney's Office with the Department of Justice is generally considered a relatively prestigious sort of accomplishment. And
Sure.
and I never ever imagined myself there. But I had a good friend, a really good friend. He was a Harvard law educated, so he had all of the pedigree. And I was talking to him once, and he was at the U.S. Attorney's Office, so he fit the mold. He's exceptionally bright, really great guy. And I remember he had just in passing once said, why don't you apply? I think you would be a good fit. And he just sort of shattered that sort of preconceived stereotype that I had brought to the table of myself about that this is something that, oh, they'll never take me, they'll never be interested in me. And that sort of sat with me in the sort of back of my head. At the time when he told me that, I was actually going to DC for my first sort of major job there, but it wasn't at the US Attorney's Office. He was coming to the US Attorney's Office. But it sort of planted that seed. And fast forward 3 years later, because of him, because of what he did and the faith that he had and the way that he sort of approached it, I ended up applying for the U.S. Attorney's Office, and I got an interview within 2 weeks of application, and I got an offer within a month and a half. Now, it was unheard of at the time to have that kind of quick turnaround at the U.S. Attorney's Office, at the at that, in that sort of capacity. And I'm not going to take all the credit for it. I certainly, I was qualified, but it was post 9/11. There was huge interest now on immigration law. I had years and years of experience in immigration law, so I was certainly at the right place at the right time. But I would have never imagined myself, and I would have never taken that step had he not broken that image and given me the confidence to think of myself in that role. So I think you're right that the first step is sort of the vision that you have of yourself, the permission that you give yourself to think of yourself deserving.
Well said. We can certainly end this on that note. The vision and the permission we give ourselves to achieve happiness, really. We can call it a successful career. At the end of the day, though, we kind of get success mixed up with money, with title, with staff, whatever we think that would be. But happiness at the end of the day is really what it's about, and giving ourselves permission to imagine that for ourselves. The power of imagination. Walt Disney and Roy Disney, really, the Imagineering concept is what they put together. But that's just true of humanity. So for all of us learning from Judge Ashley Tabaddor, where can you give yourself permission to imagine where you want to be? And don't worry about the house. You're going to get there. And I want to thank you, Ashley. You guys are dealing with tremendous circumstances right now on the immigration bench. And I wish you all great success. I hope you guys all hold that vision and give permission for the immigration bench to evolve. It takes people really being strong in their conviction and having head plus heart come together. So I hold the vision of you on the Supreme Court bench. Why not? If that sounds good to you, then that sounds good to me, because if not you, then who and why? And
Let's
so
talk about the district court first. Thank you.
All right, fine. We take small leaps in this podcast, but I've always been one. I'm always people's biggest cheerleaders, and I truly believe in that, the power of having a cheerleader and a mentor, just like that gentleman did for you. Now they call us coaches and consultants, but it's really, that's the last thing I want to say about your words of wisdom is find someone that believes in you and let them shatter that image if you need support creating that image and using your imagination, because I think we've all forgotten what that's like. So make sure you have support and mentors. And if you can't find them or originally, naturally, whatever the word is, then hire people, right? I mean, I can't even tell you how many people I hire in my world to support me. And we're not just talking about the house cleaning and the drivers or whatever people think of when they think of hired help. That's not what I'm talking about at all. I'm talking about people who have expertise and believe in a certain way of doing things. Like I have an editor for my book because that's not my expertise, right? Anyway, so I hope that's helpful to all of our listeners. Ashley, is there anything you'd like to leave us with? Final words?
I just want to say I'm so impressed by you. You're doing all of this just so naturally. This is obviously your forte. You made me feel comfortable. You had an amazing grasp of the concepts and the topics you want to talk about, and you did it in such fluid fashion that I really felt comfortable. Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you. You made my entire month. That's lovely to hear. Thank you very much. I do love doing this. I love bringing the value, and I love learning from my guests. So thank you. I will take that, and I will be happy about it for a long, long time. So thanks for joining me. And to all of you listening, I truly hope Ashley and I, Judge Tabaddor and I, hope this content was useful to you. Please share it with others if you believe it could bring value to others, lawyers or not. And if you're a woman lawyer listening, where can you apply the wisdom of Judge Ashley Tabaddor to your own life, to your own happiness, to your own career success, whatever that means for you? And that goes for all of us out there listening, man or woman, lawyer or not. Where can you seek to make that difference for yourself and find your greatness and put it out there so the rest of us can learn? And until next time, Kati G out.